What is up, everyone, and welcome back to the Biblical Hitman. It's your host, Steven. I got Mario in the house, aka Symbolic Studies. Guys, we're going to get into a lot of symbolism. It's in his name. Let's go. But hey, if it's your first time or you're returning across the channel, you want to support the platform, head on over to YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the show, share it with your friends, and drop a comment about the things that we get into. If there's nothing, or if there's anything that we didn't cover, or just your opinions, it's the best place I can directly engage with the audience. And hey, listen, we're not on video only, folks. We're on audio. Come over to the audio side and support us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or Spotify, wherever you consume all your podcast content. That is where we are. And if you like the show, if you like what I have to say, and if you just like the experience you had, make sure you drop a 5-star review. Make sure you hit that follow button. Make sure you hit that notification bell, because we do post episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And I've been dropping a bonus episode once a week for the past month. So I'm adjusting. Maybe we'll extend it to 4 episodes a week. But with all that out the way, Mario, brother, welcome to the show.
Hey, man. Thanks for the invite. I'm stoked to be here.
Yes. So for the people that aren't familiar with you, what you do, and where they can support you the most, if you could just, share that with the audience.
Yeah, of course. So for people who are interested in my work, you can visit symbolicstudies.com. I'm all over the place: Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, things like that. And I also have a Patreon, so patreon.com/symbolicstudies. And what I do is, I'm a symbologist. So I've been a lifelong artist. And in my teen years, I'm in my 40s now, but in my teens, I found design, graphic design. So I was playing around with Photoshop and Illustrator. And for a good long while, I was doing client projects. I started off doing a lot of work in the music industry. I was doing a lot of album covers and t-shirts and websites and things like that. Eventually, I found more corporate clients as I got older. But at some point, I became interested in symbolism. I was at a bookstore and I didn't realize that you could even study symbolism. I didn't know that that was a thing. But around 2007, 2008, I found my first symbolic reference book. From there, I really fell in love with just the study of symbolism. And inadvertently, I didn't realize that it was actually going to make me a better artist and better graphic designer. And so since then, I've been acquiring, all of the symbolic dictionaries and reference books I could get my hands on. And it really just opened me up to a whole new world. And eventually I found things like, astrology, the tarot, things like that. I started deepening my understanding of various world religions, including Christianity and whatnot. And basically at some point, this study became so serious for me that I felt like I needed to put information out there about it. So I started Symbolic Studies about 5 years ago. And what I generally do is I like to post information about each sign during the sign itself. So at the time of this recording, we're in Scorpio season, so we're dealing with the Scorpion. There's a lot of interesting things about the Scorpion that I find to be fascinating, and so I'm putting out content based around that. But I've also branched out into other, topics and things like that. So outside of astrology, probably one of the things I'm most well known for is my research into the North Star, the pole star, the guiding star. In my opinion, it's the star of stars. And a lot of symbolism related to, basically the North, so the North Pole, the Northern Sky, things like that. That's one of the things I'm kind of known for.
That's all so awesome. I mean, there's so much studying that goes into that. The topic seems to probably be never ending.
Mm-hmm.
What is a symbologist exactly?
Yeah, so I would say it's someone who's just, walking that path of trying to understand symbolism. So it's somebody who has just taken the field of symbolism seriously, and really, though, everyone has a symbolic awareness. Everything is symbolic. That cup you have in your hand right there, I can go on and on and on about cup symbolism, how it relates to the emotions and water, how vessels have often been related to the heart and things like that. And so we're all symbolic. We all have a symbolic awareness of things. If you decide to start studying, the meaning behind those things, I would say that is what would make you a symbologist. But you don't need to buy a book. You don't need to go through a course. You don't need to do a lot of things. I would say one of the things I actually tell people, if you're going to start taking your symbolic awareness seriously, which I recommend people do, because we're inundated with symbolism all the time. Every advertisement, every logo, every icon, every glyph, every word, every letter, these are all symbolic things. Every animal, every myth, every fable, there's symbolic value in all these different things. And so I tell people, if you want to start taking this seriously, the biggest thing you can do is just pay attention. Pay attention, be aware, observe, contemplate, all of these different types of things. So I've met people who have actually a pretty decent symbolic awareness, and they're just paying attention to the things that are around them pretty much.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, it's almost like stop signs, right?
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is there's a symbol that influences you. It actually manipulates you. So there's some sort of power as well behind symbolism. And you mentioned too, it's on commercials. It saturates our reality and everyday lives. It's everywhere. It's a hidden language. Would you say?
Yes, I would say absolutely. And some people make the argument that it's sort of the foundation of all languages, that it kind of is more primary than even language itself, right? And so, as an example, there's certain animals that innately, that there's a symbolic sort of quality to how they operate, how they look, how they move around. The serpent kind of comes to mind, right? And so the serpent, will instill fear in many people, even if they've never seen one before, but they just have this natural reaction to the hiss of the serpent and just kind of all these different types of things. So we're really hardwired to pick up a lot of these things. And I think that, you know, in some ways, how we're hardwired to interpret symbols or react to symbols, obviously it's being used against us in many, many ways, for sure.
Do you think it's you think it's a you think it's there's sinister meaning behind it? Like, for example, people are using symbolism in an evil way, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would say symbolism as a whole, it really is, it's neutral. If anything, it's actually, in my opinion, it's really here for us to get in touch with the divine. And so there's a whole entire aspect here where every symbol is actually sort of a representation of something that is kind of more etheric, more spiritual, has more of a qualitative sort of essence. But obviously, if it's neutral, just like a tool, right, you can use the tool for good purposes or evil purposes. And so, absolutely 100%, there are people out there that are using all these things to manipulate others for nefarious purposes, for dark purposes. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing too, I try to reveal at least on the show is a lot of the hidden things in the world, which pertains to a lot of the occult. And I know you mentioned a few of those occult practices, astrology and tarot and stuff like that in the beginning of the show.
hmm
How heavy is symbolism in the occult?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's completely, it's a symbolic framework. But I would say every spiritual framework, the same is true as well. So if you open up any sort of holy book from anywhere in the world, it's just completely full of symbolism. And so then the study also becomes, what is to be made out of this passage or this scripture? What are they saying symbolically? If there's a tree in a fable or a myth, what does that tree represent? What does this animal represent? And so everything is symbolic. So every animal, every color, every number, there's symbolic value there, because symbolism, what it really is, it's finding the meaning behind everything. That's really what it is. And so wouldn't you know it, there's meaning behind everything. And so no matter what you're looking at, everything in this room, there's symbolic meaning. There's a candle that's burning right here. The symbolic value of the flame or fire, it goes on and on and on with everything. But I would say, especially in the occult world, though, I would say that symbolism, I think, is used a little bit differently in the occult world. And that's kind of like a whole nother study as well, because there's a lot of very cryptic symbols. That's kind of the thing, is you're talking about like underground symbols and underground deities and, things like
Mhm.
that. So it becomes kind of a particular world to kind of navigate and things like that. And just to be clear too, my personal relationship with astrology and the tarot, I love the symbolic value of both. Astrology predates a lot of world religions by like a long shot. It's been around for a very, very long time, the study of the stars and what they represent and things like that. And for me personally, I think a lot of modern people use astrology in a very detrimental sort of way because most people are trying to figure out what's going to happen. And so this would be predictive astrology. And I'm not a predictive astrologer. I think there's a lot of value in understanding, what these signs represent and why they've kind of been preserved for thousands and thousands of years. They preserve a lot of really interesting information. And so that's kind of more of my thing personally. And I think that in many ways, all of the signs, we have a unique relationship with all of the signs. And same thing with the tarot, too. A lot of people use the tarot for predictive purposes. And that's not so much my cup of tea, personally. I like to use it as sort of a symbolic reference book, actually, in many ways.
Yeah, and it's for some reason this kind of triggered a thought where I almost feel like symbolism may even go all the way back to hieroglyphics. And then when you kind of think of like, okay, well, who created hieroglyphics, right? And it kind of
Hmm.
brings me to at least some things that I've researched to where seems like this kind of ancient knowledge, which I think a lot of the mystery schools try to hold in secret.
Hmm.
But there's some traditions that get out. For example, Freemasonry has traditions and stories that kind of go back to Enoch, and there's a lot of connections that I've read some research talking about. Enoch is Hermes, Hermes is Thoth,
Hmm.
Thoth is Mercury. So you have kind of like this character that shares divine wisdom, created these things because there was some sort of knowledge and power that this being had with the seven sciences, the liberal
Hmm.
arts, and all this kind of stuff. Do you, what are your thoughts with that? Do you think this kind of goes, maybe rabbit holes all the way back to that specific being or hieroglyphics or?
Right. So, in my opinion, what we're talking about here is like a mercurial figure. And mercurial figures, you'll find them everywhere. And in fact, I'll even say that when you really understand the symbolism of Mercury and what they represent, that every main character in a film is basically a mercurial figure. And so the mercurial figure, often he's the traveler, he's the journeyer. Oftentimes he's connected to messages, providing messages, giving people messages. Oftentimes, too, specifically with Hermes Mercury, he's a psychopomp, so he's a guide of souls. So he takes people to the other side. And so there's always this travel dynamic. You may have heard of figures that are referred to as like the wild man or the green man. There's remnants of this all over the place. As an example, if I'm not mistaken, it's Saint John the Baptist who wears like wild clothes and things like that. That there's a lot of overlap with like figures that kind of live in the wild and kind of have this old wisdom coming to the new world and providing information. And so, seemingly, what I can gather is every single culture has something along these lines. So, every wisdom keeper, the person who's like a sage who bestows wisdom upon humanity, they're often the mercurial figure. And what's kind of interesting, actually, is in Hindu mythology. I just did a presentation about this, so it's on my mind right now. In Hindu mythology, they have what they're called the Saptarishi, which is the seven sages. And these seven sages were said to come from the northern sky. And there's actually seven very important stars up there in Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper, the Great Bear. And this constellation is really, really fundamental and primary. One of the things that I've gotten into, just to kind of, go on a tangent, is that in the primordial world, there was a time before people became really obsessed with the sun. We kind of live in a world today, I would say, that's very much predominated with solar symbolism. And so, as an example, astrology, we're focusing on the path of the sun, which is the ecliptic. And so that's why we have the 12 signs of astrology, is because we're following that path. Well, the old sky clock actually was the fixed stars. So these are all of the stars in the heavens, excluding the wandering stars, which would be the planets. And the most primary of those stars were the stars right around the North Star, right? And so there's a symbolic wheel of heaven, up there. And all of the stars in the northern hemisphere, they all go counterclockwise around one star, which is the pole star. And so these 7 sages from India actually have a direct correspondence with these 7 stars. And it's interesting, a lot of people have said that the North Star is the stairway, or it's the direction of where the stairway to heaven ascends towards. There's a lot of information about this, and there's a lot of cross-cultural references about this as well. That this is sort of the stairway to heaven, the gateway to heaven sort of thing. And so this sort of gateway, this sort of stairway, it's been said that this is actually how Hermes Mercury symbolically gets from domain to domain, is through this exact same stairway. And there's a lot of myths that use a world tree as an example. And there's myths where you climb a tree and you're in a different sort of realm or reality. The tree symbolically is kind of like a bridge, and it's symbolically related to the exact same stairway that I'm referring to here. But yeah, a lot of Hermes Mercury characters, like there's a reason why they're revered in a lot of different, groups for a long time. Sages and mystics and wizards and magicians and things like that have really put these figures, kind of up there, because one of the things actually is that oftentimes these figures have a dual or triune nature. And so they understand their masculine and their feminine. They kind of understand their light and their dark. So in that way, they're actually kind of a trinity unto themselves, that they have sort of this masculine, this feminine, and then also they know how to synthesize the two. So that's usually something that comes along with these figures. So Hermes Trismegistus, as an example, the thrice great Hermes, that's kind of partly why he's related to the number 3. The number 3 usually is associated with these figures for that reason. At least that's what I've come across.
Yeah. So, at least from the Christian perspective, there's a biblical trinity, and then I believe that there's a counterfeit inverted trinity. And I think, at least from what I've looked at and what I've researched, through the biblical understanding and the narrative, is that this counterfeit trinity stemmed from ancient Babylon, right? Like the Tower of Babel. This is when the world was completely balanced at some point and was united. And if anything, I think that the Bible also alludes to some sort of hive mind concept where it wasn't specifically Nimrod that built the tower, but it was the people that collectively came together and they said, let us make a tower unto the heavens. Which I think we're going full circle back around to kind of those times for the future ahead of us. But, the sun worship, the moon worship, and the star worship, from the biblical standpoint, this is where we can, rabbit hole it all the way back to Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Why is sun worship, moon worship, and star worship so pronounced in, especially Eastern mysticism?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that here's one reason why, is for a long time, people have had this really concrete idea that what is up is more divine, and that what is up is more transcendental, and what is down is actually it's more physical, it's more material. That even I would say that what's down is almost kind of secondary, and that what is up is actually more primary. And so for a long time, humanity, even just look at the human body, right? Look at the human body and how we're so vertical, right? We're upright. We have a vertical spine. And so what's primary, if you cut off someone's head, obviously there's going to be no more person. And so our head is considered to be very primary in this system. And even when you look at ancient, ways of looking at kind of like the chakra system as an example, right? Our crown chakra, it goes from lower chakras.
That I was thinking, yeah. It's like
Right,
the Kundalini awakening is when you hit the top of your chakra.
Yeah, exactly. So you have your lower chakras, root chakra, and then you work your way up, and then you have this crown chakra all the way at the very top. And so so there's this idea that what is upward is more heavenly, more divine, all these different types of things. And so people would look at the sky, the stars, and they were influenced by them because they were so mysterious. And people, I don't think, had maybe a complete understanding of what they represented. and people made stories, and people saw basically kind of like a storybook. The stars are really kind of the original sort of book in many ways. And so people were influenced by them as well because it helped keep track of time. So this is a huge thing between this early stellar worship, by the way. I kind of interface and use synonymously with polar symbolism. This is something that a lot of people maybe have never heard before. A lot of people in today's world, they think in dualistic terms. So oftentimes they're thinking in terms of solar and lunar, but they don't realize that there's actually something that predates both, and it's polar. And so in the primordial polar age, which is also synonymous with the golden age, I would say, that the stars were viewed in one way because they helped keep track of things. And so if you're a farmer, as an example, it's helpful to know when the harvest moon is. It's helpful to know when it's Virgo season. It's helpful to know when these seasons are. One of the things I think kind of gets overlooked a little bit is the sort of agrarian kind of dynamic with star symbolism, and how it helped keep things on track. It helped keep the farm and sort of the crops in order in many ways. And we don't really think about that so much these days because most people aren't farmers, But back in the day, this was like a primary sort of thing. That's my understanding. So really, at the end of the day, I'll say that one of the most important things with all of this is orientation, that we live in a place where we need orientation. And so the North Star specifically was a point of orientation for sailors for a long time. It was the primary star in sea navigation, in early sea navigation. If you at least knew where the North Star was, you knew generally where you were going, right? And so the North Star has this dynamic where it gives you a point of pivot, it gives you orientation, but this is what all of these different sky clocks sort of represented as well. So for a lot of people, the sun gives them orientation, that the sun is sort of their primary luminary in the sky. And if they know where the sun is, then they know what season that they're in, and they know kind of what time of year, what all is encoded in that, right? So right now, as an example, we're in the fall and we're in Scorpio season. Well, wouldn't you know it, Scorpio season has a lot of symbolism that has to do with decay. It has to do with dissolution. It has to do with things breaking down, because that's what you're seeing in the natural world, in the northern hemisphere at least. The leaves are falling from trees, nature is starting to recede, all of these different things. But this is a necessary part of the cycle of everything, right? So we can't have a fruitful, bountiful spring or summer without this sort of decay in the winter and fall. And so so I think giving people a point of orientation with time was a huge, huge aspect with everything. But it also just inspired people. It inspired the imagination, I think what used to be the case was a lot of people would look towards a fire at night, and they were around this fire. And this is when people had more of an oral tradition as well. And so they're telling stories and they're passing down, different traditional tales and whatnot. And so you're looking at the fire, and the fire symbolism is really interesting. And it's very mystical when you're around a fire, right? It's very primal, but it's also very connective for the community and things like that. And so you would look at the fire, and there is this natural sort of relationship with wanting to tell your story or relay an important narrative that your people have and have tried to preserve. And then kind of, with that, you have these little fires in the heavens, these little stars. And so on one hand, you're looking at the fire down on the ground, and then you look upward, and then you're exposed to the heavens and the constellations and everything else. And some of these constellations have had lore associated with them that go way, 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 way back, really, really primordial stories and things like that. So I think that is, those are some of the things on why I think people are so influenced by what's happening up there.
Right. And I think too, why people are so obsessed with worshiping what's above is because I think at some point, there was some sort of divine intervention or some sort of supernatural event where I believe fallen angels came here to Earth, and you can see this throughout a lot of the cultures, especially in their documentation and their stories and mythologies, that there seem to be there's gods, above us, if that makes any sense. And you obviously see that in a lot of the cultures, there's a lot of demigod archetypes and typologies where, there was this event where, gods at some point mated with humankind. And, I believe that the flood is what took all of these things out, or in some sort of way stopped it from plaguing the earth at some point. But it's almost like people started to restart this type of worship with sun, moon, and star worship, if that makes any sense. Maybe to bring in some sort of metaphysical realm back to our physical realm, if that makes any sense.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, one
Because
of the
there's rituals,
things.
like people are doing rituals, and
Oh,
they're
yeah.
doing these metaphysical practices where, at least biblically, the Egyptians were um, very good at this. And especially in Exodus, you can see the story where Moses, from the power of God, casts his staff down on the ground and it turns into a snake. But then the other
Hmm.
magicians of the Pharaoh were able to do the same thing.
Hmm.
So it's a
Hmm.
metaphysical connection with our physical world.
Yeah, sure, sure. Absolutely. So the way I personally perceive it as well is actually, the thing that I tell people on a metaphysical level. It appears to me everything emanates from a center and then also returns back to that same center. So the point of origin is also the point of return, basically. And this is kind of it's going to be a head scratcher for some people, and I totally understand. It's taken me years, I think, to wrap my head around it. But when you actually are looking up, actually a really good symbol that relates to this is the wheel. I use the wheel symbolism all the time because it's such a powerful, very simple symbol that I think most people can wrap their head around and understand. But the outside of the wheel is related more so to division. The outside of the wheel is always moving, it's always spinning, it's always turning. It's related to multiplicity, and basically we're all kind of like our own wheel. And if you're operating on the outside of the wheel, you're operating kind of outside of self in many ways, I would say. And where you really want to be is you want to be in the middle of your wheel. You want to get to the center of the wheel. And when you get to the center, it's because you're operating from your center, right? And you could even say that there's a very strong, potent, heart based kind of connection here. And when you get to the center of the wheel, this is where the unification of opposites occurs. This is where non duality occurs. And so, really, it's the center of the wheel that operates as the point of origin for the whole system, right? And so, you're actually going back to source symbolically when you get to the center of the wheel. And the center of the wheel has this dynamic associated with it symbolically. And this is a traditional understanding of things. And many people have written about this, but that the center of the wheel is actually motionless, that it's immutable, that it's outside of time, even, and that it is stationary. And what people have said is that when you get to the center of your wheel, symbolically, you become the unmoved mover. And so you'll see, as an example, there's statues and paintings and things of Buddha meditating in the middle of the wheel. And so the axle of the wheel is actually a vertical axis. So when you get to the center of self, I think you really do this by being vigilant and by being present, not thinking about the future, not being caught up in the past, but by being in the present moment, the eternal now, right? And I think this is when you're going to be making your best decisions in life as well. When you get to this sort of presence, you have this vertical orientation. Most people today live in this horizontal reality. They don't want to acknowledge hierarchy of any kind. It's all about the masses or the collective or something like that. When you get to the center of your wheel, you have this vertical orientation. This puts you in touch with all that is above and all that is below. It puts you in touch with the heavens. And so symbolically, when you are on the outside of the wheel, this relates to Earth as well. This relates to the material plane. So when we are looking up, it's as though we're looking towards the center of the wheel. And so when we're looking up, we're looking at the point of origin. We're looking at something that's more primary and fundamental. And it's no different than if you're on the outside of the wheel and you're looking towards that axle. So looking up is actually looking in symbolically in many, many ways. So you're looking at source. You're looking from which we came. So there's this old traditional idea that, and I think this is true, that the heavens, what happens in the divine realms, what happens above, what happens sort of at the sacred center or holy sanctum, the point from which everything emanated from, that has a direct influence on us symbolically, metaphysically. And so it trickles down, but we do not influence it. So I think that this is sort of a distinction that took me a while to sort of appreciate or wrap my head around. It directly influences us, but we do not influence it. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't seem.
That's fascinating. I mean, with the concept of the wheel, I'm kind of glad you brought that up because it triggered a symbol that I actually saw on the shirt of Geordie Rose. I think I said his name right, but he was the founder of the D-Wave company that
Okay.
produces, quantum computers, which I think that's some sort of way that on a subphysical level, they're trying to break that threshold that naturally sits in between the metaphysical world, things like CERN and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
On his shirt, he had the snake eating itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a circle. It seems, could you break that down for me? What's that relate to?
Yeah, so that would be the Ouroboros, right? And there's a lot of versions of the Ouroboros. Sometimes it is definitely eating its tail for sure. So there's a complete loop. I've seen it where the tail is almost connecting to the mouth, but it isn't quite there. And what I would say actually is there are a number of symbols that have a sort of world kind of universal cosmic kind of aspect to it. And the serpent is one of them. So as an example, I already brought up the tree, right? And I said the world tree. Notice I didn't just say simply a tree, but there's this concept of a world tree that connects these realms above and below. The same
And
is
you
true.
see it everywhere, by the way.
Oh yeah.
The
Oh yeah,
the tree
absolutely.
symbolism, it makes me think of the tree of knowledge and good and evil,
Sure.
because it's a worldly thing. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean
Sure.
to interrupt.
Oh, no
you there.
worries. No worries. Yeah. So the serpent also has there's a world serpent connection there as well. So even as an example, going back to the tree, so the world tree in Norse mythology is Yggdrasil. And you'll notice that when you see Yggdrasil being illustrated, oftentimes there's a world serpent wrapped around, that tree, or wrapped around the whole entire sphere that the tree is contained within. And so there's this idea that there is a world serpent that basically encompasses all that exists, encompasses the whole cosmos. Now, what's really fascinating is that a lot of symbols that have this world kind of dynamic, on one level, they're basically saying that you can imagine the cosmos in some ways as being encompassed with whatever it is we're talking about, in this case, a serpent. But there's also symbolism that ties the serpent to the center as well. And this is something that I really, really think is pretty fascinating. So just to kind of riff on this dynamic real quick, the stone symbolism is really interesting and it's really important. And it's so old and it's so ancient and kind of primary that it's worth kind of unpacking a little bit. But when you imagine a stone, on one level, there are myths around the world where the whole entire universe has been likened to a stone, right? That it's this huge, huge, huge rock sort of dynamic, or potentially like a container or vessel, but you can imagine the stone as kind of operating as this thing. And on the other hand, the stone also relates to the center of all things. And so on one hand, the stone has this kind of cosmic sort of thing. You can imagine the universe as a stone symbolically, or even just the silhouette of a stone. But then also the stone represents the dead center of that system. And so it's the point of pivot for all things. You'll see that in my way of decoding things. And I wasn't like this early on. This wasn't until I found like really high quality authors, in my opinion, that the center and the circumference of a thing become kind of primary, because you'll see that so many symbols relate back to the center in many ways, and its expressions are endless, basically. So with the serpent, you have the whole idea of a serpent wrapping around the universe, but then you also have the serpent that wraps around a pole, right? Or wraps around the tree, the trunk of a tree, And so the
Is this
serpent
the
on
caduceus, right?
Caduceus, yep, exactly. The
Right.
twin serpents wrapping around it. The rod of Asclepius is another one serpent going up a rod. You'll see in medical symbolism, this is pretty common, right? You brought up the Kundalini serpents earlier, very similar dynamic. And so it's really energy going up that central bridge that I was referring to. And so if I didn't say it explicitly yet, so my opinion is that there are realms above and below, and they're all connected through their center. They're all connected through this central sort of bridge. This is referred to as the world axis. And so you could look up the world axis, or you can look up the axis mundi. And this is more of an ancient sort of cosmological symbolic understanding that there is a central bridge that exists, or a central axis that is in the middle, in the pivot of all things, basically, that everything revolves around it. So in our reality, you could say that this axis goes from the North Pole through the pole star. That's why it's called the pole star. And that's why it's the North Pole and the North Star. The pole star and the North Star are the same star. So there's this axis that goes through, the North Pole to the pole star. And this is the point of pivot, essentially for all things. And so a serpent wrapped around a tree, it's like energy going up that axis. It's like energy, or a person, if you will, going up that bridge. That's how I personally see it. And so this is mirrored with the Kundalini symbolism that you brought up. This is also mirrored with the caduceus, and so this is why Mercury holds the caduceus, because he is that serpent going up that rod. He is that serpent going up that axis. So, but the serpent too, I mean, I would say personally, if there's probably kind of a king of animals or a king of beasts symbolically, the serpent might be number one. That it represents so many different things. It's feminine, it's masculine, it can be righteous, it can be evil and demonic. It represents life. It represents so many different things.
Let's get into that. I want to get
Yeah.
into why the serpent is feminine, because this kind of just before you kind of get into it,
Sure.
I've been researching Gnosticism, and again, as a Christian, I think that in the garden there was an event that took place. It wasn't just as simple as the serpent beguiling Eve, and then Eve gave to her husband, and he was beguiled as well. I think there was more to the conversation. I think there was a lot more to the context that was taking place, and a lot of that's speculation. But it seems like the serpent was also preaching about another religion or another belief system that was in contrary to God, right? To what Adam was being instructed to do, or what knowledge Adam was being taught. And I think that why the serpent is considered feminine is because it's the exact inversion of the true nature of God, right? Because God is masculine, God is man, and then out of man, because we know that Adam was created in the image of God, and then he created woman out of man, right? So, but I think that the serpent has a connection to the divine feminine, or just femininity, because there's the other god that is opposite of the biblical God, which is Sophia, right? Sophia in Gnosticism is who sent. Well, he didn't, or she didn't send Lucifer. Well, she did, right? So Lucifer's a part of that whole kind of idea, right, to release us from the Demiurge and stuff like that. But what connections are there with the serpent and just that feminine aspect of things?
Yeah. There's a lot going on there. And so just a quick sort of thing with symbolism in general is that, with an animal, if you're looking at the symbolism of an animal, how do you decode that? All you really have to do, and it's, I'm saying it as though it's like really easy and straightforward, but it kind of is in a way. All you have to do is observe the animal. What does the animal do, right? How does it operate? What's its own sort of psychology? How does it make you feel? All of these different things. And so I've made it kind of a practice when I am studying an animal and I want to understand the symbolic value of an animal. I literally just amongst looking into my resources and things like that, I try and just observe the animal, either in the wild, and we have snakes around for sure, or, online and look up the behavior of the serpent and everything. So one of the things would be that curves are generally considered to be more feminine in nature. Look at a woman. She's more curvy than a man. A man's body is more straight, right? So curves in general is just more feminine. I even think literally of a woman dancing versus a man dancing, right? You're going to see that as well. Notice as well.
Those hips don't lie, brother.
They
Those
don't.
hips don't
Yes.
lie.
Exactly. Isn't it interesting? I've kind of wanted to do a presentation on this because to me it's fascinating. But in the Bible, there's illustrations, right, with the serpent wrapped around that tree. And it's interesting to me that we have the stripper pole and then a stripper wrapped around the pole and then dancing around the pole and all these things, right? The symbolism is actually very, very similar. You'll notice too, the dollar sign, the old dollar sign was just like one line with an S, right? That symbolism is very similar to this as well. So when I think of curves, right, this is really kind of the curves of life in a way, you could say, right? Just like with what a woman is able to provide in rearing children and things like that. And so the serpent in its curvy sort of nature definitely is more feminine. Even if you imagine too, there's a really interesting connection with the fact that the serpent also hisses, hiss or sounds like an S, right? So even look at the letter S, right? It looks like a serpent. We're talking about snakes that hiss. And then also too, it reminds me of sex, right? Or even the letter X. X has this sort of hissing kind of dynamic. We have XXX, right? Triple X. And so all of these things are completely, related to each other. And so there's a number of myths actually about a dragon mother, a dark mother. Tiamat is kind of one of these examples. And so sort of the dark mother, dark feminine kind of dynamic is also in play, I would say, with the serpent. And just generally too, the concept of chaos, the concept of sort of what I was talking about with this decay of fall. We're in Scorpio season. Scorpio is a very feminine sign, actually. It's the stinger, or excuse me, it's the scorpion itself that has a stinger, and there is some phallic symbolism with that, with the dynamic of a sting and sort of what that represents. But it's a feminine sign in so many different ways. And so this idea of things kind of dissolving or coming down in many ways can be viewed as feminine, I would say. And so if we're talking about chaos and order, order is considered to be more masculine and chaos is just generally considered to be more feminine. I would say, as an example, too, the color black. Black is more of a feminine color. White would be a masculine color. There's differences of opinion about this, though. So it depends on what culture you go to. Different cultures have different sort of ways of looking at this. Similarly, I'll say, as it relates to all of this, the moon. The moon is more feminine. The sun is more masculine. The sun's rays project. Man is more projective in nature. And so even just look at the phallus of a man, right? The phallus is sort of symbolically related to a wand. You could even say it's the original magic wand. And the wand basically represents energy being sent forth. It's more in man's nature to even travel. It's more in man's nature, going back to Mercurial wisdom keepers and stuff. It's more of man's nature to travel and conquest and journey and all these different types of things. It's way more in woman's natural, traditional nature to want to be at home and take care of the children and be more domestic and be more passive. And so even just going back to the sex organs, it's the sperm of man that goes on a journey. Your swimmers go on a journey to inseminate the egg, but it's the egg of a woman that stays within her body to become inseminated so she can have a baby, right? So women have this very magnetic sort of thing where man journeys towards woman, and not the other way around generally. Where the women are, the men will follow. Generally not the other way around. And so you brought up Gnosticism. If I'm not mistaken, like one of the first commands or instructions of the Demiurge, which is a lion-headed serpent, by the way, right? Um, one of his first commands was to move, right? And he moved. And so this is symbolically related just to man's nature, man's journey in general of just being more of the mover, right? Man has to go out and bring home the bacon, if you will. And so that's more of his sort of role, I would say. But I would say that also a huge aspect to this would be that anything that's more mysterious, because there is this lack of light, is more of a feminine sort of thing, just in general. And so the mysteries more feminine. What I found actually is when you're looking into a lot of these occult groups and a lot of these mystery schools and lodges and everything, they actually have a reverence for the goddess because they're steeped in the mysteries. And so they are sort of worshiping the goddess on the underground. And that solar worship, more masculine worship, is more of a kind of exoteric sort of thing versus an esoteric thing. So things that are hidden, mysterious, things that are sort of underneath the surface, things that kind of pierce the veil, things that are a bit darker and whatnot, those things tend to just be more feminine in nature.
Yeah, and along with that too, when I was digging into Gnostic theology, and again, like just for anyone listening, I don't advocate for it. I'm not a Gnostic, but what I'm trying to do is figure out what took place in the garden, and I do think that there was a schism that took place between truth, which was, what God was sharing to Adam. And I think that the serpent came in and wanted to build some sort of, again, counterfeit religion or whatever. And that's just my opinion. But thinking about it, it's almost like there may be some sort of trinity with the understanding of the Abraxas, Sophia, and then the serpent. And I
Hmm.
don't know if there's any connection there, but, I wanted
Oh
to
yeah.
ask you about that. And then can you also break down why the Abraxas is illustrated in the way it's presented?
Yeah, sure. So my personal opinion is that I come from a school of thought, and I never thought, to be honest with you, when I got into symbolism, I never thought that there would be like a philosophical school that I would attach myself to. It's never been my style. It's not something that I was even really looking for. But as I got deeper and deeper into my symbolic studies, I came across a few authors that completely changed the game for me personally, that then I was able to kind of see it in contrast to everything else I had been reading up until that point, and see that these guys are the quintessential symbologists of the modern world, that they broke it down clearer and better. And in my opinion, these guys are where it's at symbolically, and these are the traditionalists. And Rene Guénon, he died in the 50s. He wrote his best works in the 20s and 30s, and he's someone that basically is kind of like at the head of this sort of philosophical movement. But he basically he was, in my opinion, he's the best symbologist of the modern world, and so he broke down things better than anyone else, in my personal opinion. And so I've read a lot of his work. So if people kind of are curious about where my sort of foundation comes from as a symbologist, Rene Guénon is one of these guys. And so one of the things that these guys like to discuss and what they put forward is that there was a tradition that preceded all traditions. And they refer to this tradition as the primordial tradition. And so you're going to see remnants of this tradition in all traditions since, right? And that this primordial tradition lined up with the last golden age. And so what's interesting to me when I look at the symbolism of the Demiurge or Braxis and Sophia and the Serpent and things like that, there's so much astrological symbolism that's associated with it, it'll make your head spin. And so I'm inclined to think that they're actually encoding an older story. And this story is the story between two signs. And this would be Virgo and then Leo. And so in astrology, the first sign of the new year would be Aries. It goes Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and then you have Leo, and then you have Virgo. Leo is the lion, and Virgo is the virgin. She's the maiden. And so it's interesting. The only sign ruled by the sun is actually Leo, which is right next to the only sign ruled by the moon, which is Cancer. And so this is interesting because there are constellations. There's illustrations of the constellations like in Egypt. So there's a well-known sky map called the Dendera Zodiac. And you'll see a lion, emblematic of Leo. And you'll notice that there's actually a woman holding its tail. And so this is basically saying that the woman is actually in charge here, that the woman is in control, that the lion is actually subordinate to the woman itself. The lion and the woman are actually on a boat, and the boat looks serpentine in nature. It's like a serpent boat. Well, this is really interesting because Leo and Virgo are actually on top of a serpent, and the serpent's name is Hydra. And so to me, they're showing this direct relationship in the Dendera Zodiac. Now, what is fascinating to me is that the lion has been viewed as having this very close relationship to virgins. And I'll say that most queens that we come across in the modern world, they actually are modeled after Virgo. And so a lot of queens have this Virgoan sort of dynamic baked into it. And so you'll see queens as an example where they will have lions on their throne, or they'll have two lions in front of them, something along these lines, or that they'll be on a chariot being pulled by lions, right? And so the virgin, the maiden, she has had a long relationship with the lion, and she's right next to a lion in the zodiac system, right? And so you actually see this preserved in one of the tarot cards. That the tarot card I'm thinking of is the Strength card. This is the 8th or 11th card in the major arcana, depending on the deck. And what do you see in that artwork? You see a woman holding the jaws of a lion. And basically, this is really emblematic of a mother and child, in my opinion. So this is no different, in my opinion, than the Virgin Mary holding Christ. Christ was referred to as the Lion of Judah. And so you're basically seeing an expression of a mother-child dynamic. And so in that card, she's holding the jaws of the lion, and she is saying that she is more primary than the lion, that she preceded the lion, that the lion is actually subordinate to her. The Hebrew letter, because all of the cards in the major arcana, for people who don't know, there's two main parts to the tarot. And the 22 cards of the major arcana is what most people think of when they think of the tarot. And there happens to be 22 Hebrew letters. The Hebrew letter associated with the Strength card is Tet or Teth, which literally means serpent. And so this is interesting because what I found is that lions and serpents have a long historical relationship with each other as well, in that they've basically been viewed as synonymous creatures. And if you notice, there's a lot of overlap between the two. And so when it comes to both feline and serpent, there are species that have slit pupils, as an example. They both hiss. The feline and the serpent, they both hiss. They both strike in a very similar sort of way, the way a cat strikes with its paw versus the way a serpent will strike. Very, very similar. And they both have tails. And they both have this very kind of like slinky, kind of flexible kind of dynamic associated with the two. And so when you start looking into lion, feline symbolism, you'll see that it overlaps very strongly with serpentine symbolism. And then you'll also see that the serpent and lion also have a very strong relationship to dragons. So much so that dragons, serpents, and felines are nearly synonymous with each other. And so if you look at a myth that involves a lion or a serpent, you could almost interchangeably kind of imagine it as being one or the other. And the myth is kind of holds up as is. And so one of my best videos that I did is actually about all of this stuff. And so that's why Sophia relates to both the lion and serpent, basically. And you'll see this again mirrored in the zodiac because they're right next to each other. You'll see this in the Strength card. So for a long time they've been right there. You know, they're a pair. And it's even been said that the the lion has a fondness for virgins. This is sort of an old myth. And there's like a twofold sort of thing with the lion and the serpent and the dragon, that the lion can be viewed as this righteous, regal, royal animal that is there to protect the virgin, to protect the maiden, or to protect the queen. And Sophia would be this sort of figure in that storyline. Or the lion is there to do harm to the queen and to take advantage, of her. And so the lion can be viewed basically in both ways, as this like positive sort of entity or this very negative presence as well.
You broke that down very nicely, and it elaborates a lot more for me. And it kind of brings me back to a lot of the Freemasonry symbolism. And this is two pillars, the sun, moon, and stars, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know a lot of people may be ignorant to it, but I think that's another piece of symbolism. I at least would like my audience to kind of learn more about.
Yeah.
And with the square and the compass and all this kind of stuff, could you break that down too as well?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed is, as you brought up the pillars, right, of Freemasonry. And so the twin pillars are a pretty big deal in that system. And you'll see that there's twin pillars when you look at illustrations of Solomon's Temple, as an example. There's twin pillars there. You'll notice that a lot of synagogues will also have twin pillars. You'll also notice that the Gemini twins, the glyph for Gemini, there's twin pillars. It's Roman numeral 2, basically. And all of these relate to each other very strongly. And what I'll say is that on sort of the most esoteric aspect of it is that whenever you see twin pillars, there's actually an implied third pillar there. It's not visible, but it's there. And symbolically, one of these pillars, the visible pillars, one will oftentimes have a sun on top of it. The other one will have a moon on top of it. And so what's to be said about the central pillar? So one is solar, one is lunar. The central pillar is actually what could be best described as polar. And so this symbolism precedes solar and lunar worship, basically. So in my opinion, a lot of these Freemasonic tracing boards, they're actually showing you 3 different symbolic ages. That's how I interpret it, is that we live in a very solarized world. That would be the solar pillar, more masculine. And there was a time where lunar symbolism seems to have been a really big thing. And there's still traditions where they're going off of a lunar sky clock. So as an example, the holy days of Judaism and Islam are based on the moon. That's why they don't land on the same days every single year. Before that, like I was saying earlier, it was the stellar sort of tradition, the fixed stars that people were paying attention to. And you could say that this falls in line with polar symbolism because, again, all of the stars revolve around this central star, which would be the pole star, the North Star, and this symbolic axis, right? Which still is there, but people's mindset has sort of shifted over time. And so if you want to understand the 2 pillars of Freemasonry, you have to understand the central pillar, the single pillar, right? And so notice that with 9/11 as an example, we went from twin pillars to a single tower. That's encoded with a lot of deep, heavy symbolism.
I was gonna say that definitely sounds like what we're getting into.
Yeah, definitely. And so the compass and square, for people who are unaware, the main symbol for Freemasonry is the compass and square. And so you have a square down below, and then you have a compass on top, and then you have a G right there in the middle. And the simplest way I can break that down is that heaven has often been viewed as being very spherical. It's more so related to the circle, and it's more so related to the infinite points of a circle as well. And so it makes sense that on top you would have the compass, which is designed to do what? To make circles, right? And then down below you have the square. Earth has been more so likened to a square. It's more so likened to a cube as well. That's another thing. And so Earth, as an example, people have said that there's 4 corners of Earth, or that there's 4 winds sort of emanating from the corners of Earth, something along these lines. And so Earth is would be that square down below because it's meant to create 90-degree angles. And so you basically have a symbol emblematic of the heavens, a symbol emblematic of earth down below, and then you have that G. What is the G about? A lot of people have said it represents geometry or gnosis or God or something along these lines. The two things I think of off the bat is the fact that if you go through the alphabet and you come back around to G, it's the 33rd letter in that case. And we have 33 vertebrae, in our spine. Like I said earlier, Hermes Trismegistus, or these mercurial figures, oftentimes are related to the number 33. Christ died when he was 33 years old. I think there's a lot of mercurial symbolism with Christ as well, for sure. And so I see it that the G could potentially relate to 33 itself, or kind of in a more simple way, it's the seventh letter of the alphabet, the G. And as I said earlier, all of these traditions, it seems like all modern traditions go back to an earlier tradition. And the original 7 stars of enlightenment, it's been said, is actually Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, which is in the northern sky. And there's a relationship. So just to kind of cut to the chase, I think that Ursa Major and its 7 stars were the original 7 stars of enlightenment. And a lot of that symbolism transferred over to the 7 planets at some point as well. And most systems that make use of a number 7, as an example, there are alchemical traditions like Azoth alchemy. They have 7 steps in their system. A lot of things that relate to the number 7, the rainbow has 7 colors to it. A lot of things that encode the number 7 have to do with transmutation and have to do with transformation. And I think in the most esoteric sort of sense, in its most kind of primordial sense, like the origin of a lot of this stuff goes back to Ursa Major. In fact, when you look at the Big Dipper in the heavens, it looks like the number 7. And I'm kind of convinced that actually this is where we get the glyph, the actual symbol of number 7, how we draw it. We get it from Ursa Major. And there's a lot of good reasons to think this, actually. In ancient Egypt, they had a reverence for this constellation as well. They referred to it as the thigh of a bull. And they would have these different rituals where they wanted to have kind of an object that represented this constellation. And sometimes they would use this tool, this woodworking tool called the adze tool, ADZE. And the adze tool looked exactly like a number 7. And so the number 7 has been hooked up with the northern sky for like a very, very long time. And so, if I'm not mistaken, in Latin, to refer to the north is septentrio. And sept actually goes back to 7. So septenary, it basically means 7. Septagon means a 7-sided shape. Even September is a reference to the number 7, the same way October is a reference to the number 8. Even though it's not the 7th and 8th month of the year, it has this esoteric relationship with the 8 and then also with the 9. But September, though, actually is the 7th month after the beginning of the astrological new year. And so this is another thing I'll say, that understanding astrology, it unlocks a whole new level of awareness of where we get a lot of words from as well. So as an example, Libra is the origin of where we get the LB abbreviation from, LB abbreviation for pound from. So the LB for pound literally comes from Libra, and Libra is the scales, right? So you're weighing things. And so there's a lot of things like that in our world and just in language in general where it actually comes from an astrological sort of origin story.
Yeah. Is there like an economical meaning with the scales?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I think of that biblically, and one of the seals of Revelation talks about basically that when John is seeing these visions and he's getting these revelations from Jesus, he's seeing in, I believe it's the 3rd seal, where he sees a scale system and it's off. It's not correct. It's off. And what he describes, the meaning of this, is that basically there's like this economic collapse that you in a way have to work the entire day just to make enough money to feed yourself, just barely the amount of the nutrition that you need per day, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. No, the
Isn't it like in the
scale.
treasury as well? Isn't it like involved in the treasury
Oh, sure.
department or
You'll see it
something?
all over the place. Lady Justice is oftentimes holding a scale in one hand, a sword in the other hand.
Right.
Archangel Michael, he's always holding a scale in one hand, a sword in the other hand.
Huh.
The scale and sword are actually very similar sort of symbols, actually. Um, yeah, so the scale, we just went through Libra season, so Scorpio comes after Libra. What's fascinating astrologically is that the scales are at the fall equinox. And so this is when we have equal parts day and night. And so the scales symbolically relate to this balance of day and night. So we have equal parts day and night at the spring equinox, and then we also have equal parts day and night at the fall equinox. And so there's two main parts to the zodiac. There's the day side, which is from Aries to Virgo, and then you have the night side from Libra to Pisces. And the scales, Libra is right there at that sort of turning point from like the day side to the night side. And it's fascinating as well because the symbol for Virgo is an M and there's an embedded fish. This is intriguing to me because we're dealing with the Virgin and she has that fish right there. And a lot of people have said that Christ symbolically could be imagined or viewed as sort of the Messiah for the Piscean age. And there's a lot of fables relating to, fish, right, in the Bible. And so a lot of people put a lot of symbolism, Piscean symbolism on Christ. And opposite Virgo is actually Pisces, the fish. And so it's almost as though you have this M with the fish in it, and that fish is emblematic of her child, her symbolic child, which would be Jesus. And so that's one way people have looked at it. But on the other side of Libra, you also have Scorpio, and its glyph is also an M. And so on one hand, you have the scales in between these two symbols that look like M's. And one side, Virgo, is sort of this pure, basically very innocent maiden sort of figure. And then you have Scorpio, which is like this darker sort of sign. And so it's really interesting that you kind of have this balance on both sides of Libra. But what I've read before is that Libra comes after the harvest. And so Virgo season is all about the harvest of wheat. It's all about, she's the harvest maiden. So she's the grain goddess. So traditionally, it was during this time that people would harvest their crops. And during the next sign, this is when you would weigh what you've produced so you can actually go to market so you can get what it's worth. And so now you need the scales. You want to make sure that you have an accurate weight for how much grain you're going to be selling somebody. And so what I've read and what I've come across is that Libra has long been associated with all things related to numbers, actually. And so weights and measures, if you're weighing something, you might put it into a book, right? You might put your profits and losses into a book. And so Libra also corresponds with books and also corresponds with bookkeeping. There's a reason why Libra is the first 5 letters of library. And so this also gets into the law and this idea of sort of judgment against people. In ancient Egypt, there was the weighing of the souls ceremony. And so upon death, your heart was weighed against the feather of truth, ma'at. And if your heart was heavier than the feather, that was not favorable for the afterlife transition. If it was lighter than the feather, that was favorable for the afterlife transition. And you would have a scribe there making notes of all of this. And so once again, going back to the bookkeeping sort of dynamic. So yeah, the scales relate to everything related to weights and measures. It's a completely obscure history, but we actually get the pound sign, the hashtag pound sign. We get that from Libra as well, that there's a whole history linking that to Libra. And so whether it's economic and you're weighing precious metals, as an example, if you're going to be using precious metals in any way, shape, or form, it's good to know how many ounces of silver you have or gold or whatever. So you would need an accurate scale. And then also, there's this afterlife sort of dynamic, being judged, and the scales are sort of there judging you before you transition. What we're symbolically weighing potentially your good deeds, your bad deeds, weighing what's in your heart. Was what was in your heart, was it more spiritual and lighter and etheric and positive, or was it heavier, and was it more materially based and physical and carnal or lustful or what have you? So yeah, on so many different levels, the scales do weigh out all of these things. And I'll just say one other thing about it, though. The same thing that I tried to describe with the two pillars, that's encoded in scale symbolism. That the two pans could be related to solar and lunar energy. It could be masculine and feminine. But in order for the scale to function or work, you need to have the central column. That central column would be emblematic of that polar pillar, and that it's related to what preceded this split. There's more of a unifying presence with that central column. And so, Libra as a sign encodes a lot of really interesting things that way. And so, but it's that central column or central pole that's more primary and important than the two scales themselves.
That's great, man. Dude, you're jam up, man. You're jam up. I really enjoy what you say, man, and how
Right
you
on, man.
break
Awesome.
things down.
Hell yeah.
I got to give you my thoughts on a few things here.
Please,
Just
please.
wrapping it back around to Freemasonry, right? The two pillars. This well, as far as, and everything that I'm saying is just based off of what I've read and what I've dug into, but the two pillars kind of goes all the way back to the Freemasonry traditions of the inventor of hieroglyphics, which would be, they say it goes back to Enoch, of the Setite lineage, which would be the non-spurious lineage, biblically. Because then you had the lineage of Cain, who also had another Enoch. But when you actually break it down and you kind of put these things into columns and you kind of reference and cross-examine certain things based off of the traditions, it points more to the spurious Enoch, which is from Cain's lineage, which Cain, I believe, was following the serpent, if that makes any sense, because going back to biblical narrative, I believe that Cain killed his brother not because he was just jealous, but I think he was also offering the very first human sacrifice to the god of this world.
Oh yeah.
And I think that the god of this world is Satan, Lucifer, the devil, the serpent, the dragon. There's a bunch of different titles and ideas wrapped around this entity, this concept. Maybe it's multiple people, maybe it's a singular. I think it's more singular, and I've had people on the show where we've kind of gotten into that conversation. But going back to Freemasonry with the two pillars, Enoch was said to inscribe on one pillar, the secret sciences of the spurious side of this knowledge that would survive through fire, and then the other pillar would be able to survive a flood in which his son Lamech was the one that wrote that down on that pillar. And so like that, these pillars would be able to survive any kind of cataclysm, so that and it's like they knew a cataclysm was coming, but they wanted the knowledge, the secret mystery, religion, in my opinion, to survive anything that God was going to judge in that time. And going back to the square, the compass, I like how you said that the compass, right, makes a circle, and we kind of connected some of the serpent symbolism with the circle, right,
Yep.
with the wheel and all of that stuff. Another interesting thing I wanted to maybe throw in there was the compass, in which how it could, like you said, relate to the idea of four corners. Well, in ancient Babylon, Nimrod had, it's speculated upon, right? So, because a lot of this stuff is just so old, you can't really source all the way back to this stuff. But it said that Nimrod was serving a god, and that god was Marduk, right? Marduk was the god of ancient Babylon, and Marduk had weapons, and they were the four winds.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe there's some sort of connection there. And then there's a connection where Marduk is, this god that is a typology of Satan, which, there's a bunch of different typologies with all the mythologies, meaning that this god is the same as this god. It's just different timelines, different brand label put on it, from the different cultures and stuff like that. Um, I want to cover a little bit of the Star of David, because there's a few
Ah,
things that come to mind with the Star of David. The triangle pointing up, the triangle pointing down. When you merge these two together, it gives you that six-pointed star. Also, with the four elements of creation, right? Air, earth, fire, and water. These are all triangles as well, and when you merge these all together,
mm-hmm.
it makes a six-pointed star,
Right.
as well. And I know that there's a lot of alchemists that have tried to some way combine these elements together to create what's called the ether, which then again, that's where you kind of get the
Mm-hmm.
pentagram with the circle
Yep.
around it, right? The ether is that circle. Um, I know it's a lot thrown at you there, but take me down your thoughts with that.
Yeah, sure. So, the ether, I'm assuming too, would be related to like the quintessence, and so like the quin relates to like
And the
five.
ether is like kind of in the scientific field, which I just think science is just a revamped idea of occultism. But it's related to darkness, correct? Dark matter. This is like the ether or the quintessence, the energy, the vril, if that makes any sense, right? Or am I
It,
kind of
yeah, no, it has relationship. Yeah, there's multiple angles to kind of look at with that, definitely. And I like that too. I mean, modern science, I think that's the profane science, and there's so many things that it has completely backwards and not right.
right?
So as an example, like one quick thing is I personally, I know in school I was brought up to believe that matter came before anything else, that the material world came first, everything kind of proceeded after that. I see it as the exact opposite. I think spirit came first, and then the material realm is like the last thing. Actually, personally, is kind of how I see it. It's an inversion. There's so many things in the modern world that are
I
completely
agree with that,
inverse.
and at least being in the medical field, neuroscience wraps the. It's such a question that mind boggles everyone in the community. Where was it thought that created the mind, the brain, or was it the brain that created the
Right,
thought? If that makes any
right,
sense.
right. Yeah, no, exactly. So when it comes to the Star of David, yes, as you just said, I'm like one way you could view it would be an upward triangle. The upward triangle is emblematic of fire. If you add a line through it, it's also air. The downward triangle is water. If you add a line through that, that's earth. So the upward triangles are the masculine elements, fire and air. Notice that in the tarot, at least, the wands are emblematic of fire, very phallic, very projective, and then the sword is emblematic of air, also very projective, and then earth and water are the feminine elements. So you could say that the Star of David together represents all of these elements together. It's the unification of opposites. You can put it that way. One of the things, though, that you've probably come across, I'm sure some of your listeners have come across, is that you can draw from tip to tip in the Star of David, and you create a cube. Basically, you complete a silhouette of a cube, a six-sided cube, and so there's actually cube symbolism baked into the Star of David. And so a cube has six sides. The Star of David has 6 points. When you connect the tips of the star, you have six different tips, six different sides. And so the cube is really interesting because all three of the Abrahamic religions actually kind of have nestled into it this very curious cube symbolism. And so if you unfold a cube, you can actually create a Latin cross as well, right? And so there's this embedded cross within the cube. And then also in Islam, of course, they have the Kaaba cube in Mecca. So then you have the black cube there. And so the cube symbolism, a lot of people have said that it's very Saturnian in nature. And I think that there is something to be said about that. The reason why that makes sense is because with Saturn, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but there's actually the at its southern pole, I believe. I don't know if it's both poles, but there is actually kind of almost this aurora borealis effect that is created on Saturn, and it looks like a six-sided hexagon. And that's very interesting. Saturn is also related to compartmentalization. It's related to borders and boundaries. It's related to walls, and it's related to partitions. And what is a cube? A cube is basically kind of like a vessel, right? And so it's like a vessel. Esoterically, I would say that what the cube relates to in many ways as well would be the six directions of space. So from where you're at right now, or anyone listening to this, you have forward, backward, left, right, and then you have up and down. So you have the six directions of space, which is kind of a curious thing. One of the things esoterically that people can kind of keep in mind is whenever you see any kind of shape, there is always a hidden element with its center. So if you're dealing with the cube itself, there's six directions, but there's also the seventh point in the middle. Saturn happens to be the seventh planet, you know, and so it's the furthest planet out. If you're looking at the traditional planetary system, it's the oldest planet, it's the slowest planet. It's related to the number 7 as well. And you'll notice that there's actually a lot of Jewish symbolism that relates to partitions, relates to walls. You've got the Wailing Wall as an example. In a lot of like traditional Orthodox weddings, you'll see that men and women are divided. So you'll see that there's a wall, a partition right there in the middle of the hall or what have you. Obviously, there's everything going on with Israel and Palestine as well, and the dynamic of the border there. So literally walls and partitions actually have a huge part to play in a lot of the things that they do. I'm not sure if you've ever come across the Uriv line or what that's all about. Is that something that's come across your radar by chance?
No. Maybe if you talk more about it, maybe I've seen it, but it doesn't ring a bell.
No, so I don't know the exact law, how it's written, but there is an aspect where I know that for certain sects of Jews, that there are, you know, certain days where you can't use, you know, technology freely, and that there's certain laws. Obviously, the idea of like a law is like a big thing for them. I've read too that basically rabbis are kind of like lawyers, pretty much, interpreting God's law and all these things. And so in order to kind of circumvent or get around some of these laws, these holy laws, they've developed what's referred to as an Uriv line. So URUV line. And it's literally just a string that they can wrap around a neighborhood or a string that they can wrap around a certain part of town that permits them, allows them to use some technology because they're in this holy space. And the biggest Uriv line that I've come across is actually around, I think it's like most of Manhattan. Most of Manhattan has this Uriv line that's wrapped around the whole section, that whole borough, like almost half of it or more, so that people can kind of do what they need to do there, because there's a lot of Hasidic Jews there and things like that. And so this line, though, is a symbolic border. That's my main point, is that the line is a symbolic border. It's a symbolic partition. And so so there's a lot of curious things about that. Even the color black, you know, the color black relates to Saturn. And, you know, for Orthodox Jews, that's the color of choice, right? That's what you're going to see people wearing and things like that. So I do see it that the Star of David potentially has a lot of Saturnian symbolism baked into it via this cube dynamic. And then you've probably noticed this, but there's like black cubes all over the world. You know, there's some in New York. I've seen pictures of them all over the place. The black cube rabbit hole is very deep. There's a lot to be said about that. Those are the first things that come to mind with the Star of David specifically. And I'll say the other thing that is very interesting is if you have the upward triangle and downward triangle, and it's the fusion of these two energies, masculine, feminine, you know, what have you, this relates very strongly to the twin pillars as well, that are, like I said, in front of Solomon's temple at a lot of synagogues and whatnot. And I think that this is just worth unpacking ever so slightly because it relates to Freemasonry and actually relates to some of the things you're saying about Cain. And so there's a lot of hero twin myths where one twin kills the other twin. And that's just how it goes, that there's a darker twin and a lighter twin. And they get along for a good long while, and they're able to accomplish a lot together until things come to a head, and then the evil twin will kill the light twin. One great example of this would be the story of Romulus and Remus, and this is a Roman myth, and they are credited for being the founders of Rome. In fact, we get Rome from Romulus, and the whole thing behind it is that they built the first wall in Rome, and they built it brick by brick. This is intriguing because in ancient Babylon, they referred to Gemini season as the brick mold. The reason why they referred to Gemini as the brick mold is because this is when they would resume baking bricks outside underneath the hot sun. And then they would resume construction projects with those bricks. And so Gemini season was referred to as the brick mold. And so in this Roman myth, they're putting these bricks into place. And the twins actually have two very different ways of putting these bricks into place. Romulus is more of a brute, and he's more physical. And Remus is actually very different in that he plays music to levitate the bricks into place. So two very different ways of how they're putting bricks together to build this wall, a partition. And eventually, at some point, Remus decides to jump over the wall. And so Romulus kills Remus at the same wall that they were building together. Now, this is intriguing as well because in the Sun card, you generally, in most modern decks, you're going to see a child on a horse. In older decks, for the Sun card, you're going to see two children in front of a brick wall. And so the twin symbolism of Gemini and the brick mold is like maintained in that card. And it's also maintained in this mythology. Now, we were referring to Freemasonry. Freemasons call each other brothers, right? They have the reverence for the two pillars, which is basically the Gemini symbol. And it's all about masonry, right? So it's all about bricks and Masonic things. And so Romulus kills Remus at this wall. And what I've read is that a lot of these hero twin stories actually have to do with the difference between nomadic civilizations and agrarian farming settler societies. The nomad wants to travel. The nomad wants to be free. We all started off as nomadic peoples. And it wasn't until later on did, towns and cities get founded and things like that. For every city that's built, for every city that erects a wall, this prevents the nomad from being able to freely travel, right? This same story I've read also is encoded in Cain and Abel, that Cain kills Abel and Cain establishes the first town. He's the founder of the first town. And so it's the agrarian settler that wants to settle down and build a city, build these walls that prevents the nomad from traveling, that ends up killing their nomadic brother or twin. So there's a lot of hero twin stories, and you can just relate this to brothers as well. It's very similar sort of thing.
I mean, that's crazy because there is something to it, and I believe that why it's such a foretold story throughout history and different cultures and stuff is because it actually happened. Like this was something that took place. I mean, I don't think humans are too creative. Yeah, yes, we have an imagination, but to come up with the same kind of stories and to pass them on, I think there's some sort of rhyme or pattern to it, to an actual source, if that makes any sense. So I'm with you. I think it's very fascinating. The twin mythology is blowing me away because it makes a lot of connections for me and all that.
Yeah. It made a ton of connections for me. And so the reason why, if you appreciate this line of thinking or some of this information, another thing that you'll probably be into as well is that there's a major difference between nomadic societies and nomadic cultures and how they view art, and settler agrarian cultures and how they view art as well. So nomadic peoples, they actually prefer things that are auditory. They prefer art that unfolds over time. And so they prefer stories, the oral tradition. They prefer music. So they're very musical. Because think about it. If you're a nomadic peoples and you're always traveling, and you're always in these caravans, or you're on your migration, you can't take a lot of things with you, but you can sing, you can bring a flute with you, you can bring these instruments with you. And they actually had a lot of good reason. They were encoding, what I've read, some nomadic tribes. In some of their songs, they were encoding things that they would encounter along the way. And so their songs were actually encoding their journey in many ways. And so they're very musical. They like things that are auditory. So they like art that unfolds over time. The agrarian settler, they actually prefer art that unfolds over space. And so they have a different relationship with time and space. And so they like visual works. They like architecture. They like statues. They like paintings. They like all of these different types of things. This is interesting as well because you'll notice that in Islam, as an example, most people don't like abide by this, but I've read even that there are some really devout traditional Muslims that won't even let their children draw, that they won't even let them draw anything because they're actually anti-iconic, and that they don't like the visual arts generally, and they don't want to portray the human form. This is an old throwback to when they were nomadic peoples, right? And so this is why Remus plays music to levitate the bricks into place. And this is why Romulus actually just lifts the bricks and puts them into place. Now, the other thing that's interesting about all of this too is as people became settled, and if Cain is the first, the first founder of a town, that means that like every city in many ways, I can get down with this for sure, is kind of like a little Babylon. That's why Babylonian things happen in the city, degeneracy and just kind of all of these things that people do in the city, drug use and everything else, right?
Yeah, it's like a lot of
Perversions.
wickedness or sin that
Absolutely.
amplifies more in a city setting rather than agricultural or more remote areas.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so this is why this is all bred in the city. And this is why, what do cities need? They need a lot of bricks. They need a lot of concrete. They need a lot of masons, constructing things, excuse me.
Mm.
And so there's a whole entire aspect here with that. And what has happened over time is that the people who live in the city, they become very physical. They become very materialistic. And one way you can put this is that when people were more nomadic and this was the lifestyle, they actually were living a very qualitative life. So their spiritual sort of core was really intact. And they were around nature and they were doing things on their own. They're actually, most nomadic tribes, from all the research that I've done, very, very kind of insulated, that they didn't have a lot of people with them. In a city, you can have millions and millions of people, obviously. With the nomadic tribe, I think literally it was like a dozen, 2 dozen people. And, there were big caravans. There have been big movements like that. But by and large, most people's normal travel routine, it was like you, your family, and another family, and your animals, and things like that. It wasn't this big collective, millions upon millions of people following you. It was a very, very small sort of thing. So people's qualitative life was, I think, very high, and that they had this spiritual connection with all things in many ways. And as people became more settled, what has happened is that all things quality got taken over by things that are quantitative. So basically, quantity took over quality. And so now we live in a world that can be described as the reign of quantity, right? And so people are concerned with, just strictly some people, not everyone, obviously, just with finances. And so people in the material modern world that are maybe city dwellers, they tend to see quantity over everything else. And so how much does this cost? What is the value of this thing? Everything kind of gets translated to like purchasing power and kind of just, that system of just monetary gain and whatnot. And so we do live in this reign of quantity sort of dynamic now. And this reign of quantity also sees it that if you can't measure it, if you can't hold it, if it's not physical, if you can't, do all these things, then it doesn't exist. So the modern mind is more so built like that. Is that if it's not physical and if I can't hold it and see it and whatever, then it just simply doesn't exist. So therefore I can completely write it off. So that's why a lot of modern people, they don't have a spiritual backbone at all, because to them it simply just like does not exist, you know? So you can see that there's kind of like a through line with this lineage of Cain being the first murderer, you know, establishing the first town. And you could say too, I don't know if you said this earlier, but Freemasons have this idea that they come from the lineage of Cain as well. I don't know if all of them do, but
Right.
I know that some of them definitely
And
do.
that's why I include it to be the spurious Enoch, to be the one that was the creator of hieroglyphics. He was an astronomer. He was so many things. And when I say spurious, it's kind of going back to that twin mythology where one was using frequencies or vibrations or music to levitate things, to put them into place, and the other one was doing it simple, or
Mhm.
just in a natural way. And when you take that concept, I think it goes back to how are they using the knowledge that has been passed down from Adam to them, right?
Mhm.
Cain was still under the household of his father, right? Abel was still under the household of their father. And I feel that they learned this knowledge and information that was passed down from Adam, but Cain took it and started to practice occult or metaphysical practices to be able to manipulate the subphysical realm and to do certain things. And I think even think that maybe that's why, or it could be possible to why God did not bless him for the offerings that he was giving over to God. Right? He was blessing
Mm.
Abel. Abel was doing things in the proper way, the just way, the way God intended it to be done. And I think Cain was following the religion, the mystery religion of the serpent. Because I've been doing a lot of studies with
Right.
mystery religion, and I think that it's been here since the beginning of time. And I really think that it comes down to two religions at the end of the day. I think it's truth, and then I think it's error. And I think that uh, there's this platform, there's this shelf that all of the religions have they're all on this platform, and they all share this same spirit that they are practicing with. And I think that's mystery Babylon religion. That's this familiar spirit that the Bible talks about, that in a way counterfeits and it mimics um you know the true spirit, the Holy Spirit, because there's things that these religions really preach that are very good. They're positive. They're agreeable. You know, they sound really good, but it's error and it's not truth. If that makes any sense, it just kind of goes back to how things stemmed out from the garden and to where we're at today. Like for example, theosophy, right? It's you
Yeah.
know, Madame Blavatsky, like she talks about that. Um, all of these religions have a piece of it right, but then she discredits the only two religions, the Judaic, Christian, morals or values, because I believe it's the thing that all the religions have in common are they're worshiping the serpent. They don't know it. They may call it something different, but at the end of the day, I think that they're worshiping the serpent, and they don't want to worship the demigod, the god that put boundaries on us, the one that put us in bondage or chains. And you know what? Like, I get it. It sounds terrible, right? It sounds terrible. Why would a god put these restrictions on you? But me being a father, and I don't know if you have kids.
I do not know.
Okay, well, and that's okay. But just as a dad, this is something that I learned from the experience of being a dad. And I put restrictions on my kid because I love her and I don't want her to do things that would hurt her or um you know bring harm her way, if that makes any sense. So I can
Oh yeah, of
understand
course.
putting restrictions is a good thing, but it's the serpent who's this liberator, which wants, it makes me want you to break down the Statue of Liberty, right? Because there's the Statue of Liberty, right? One arm up, one arm down. Technically, yeah, it could be like as above,
Mhm.
so below. It's the light bearer. It's got the seven um,
Right.
spikes on her head, and things like
Mhm.
that. And there's a chain that's broken on her feet, right? I believe it's like the liberator is who set you free from. the bondage,
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, what I'll say to all of this is I think in the modern world, I do my heart in some ways aches for like a lot of modern people who have to live in today's world. And there are a lot of people are lost at sea. And so they're lost at sea. I think that we are living through a spiritual crisis, in so many different ways. And I think that people want what I said earlier is orientation. Give me a point of pivot. Give me something to follow. Give me some guidance. I want some guidance. And a lot of people are unwilling to sort of do that in their stubbornness. And I think that in some ways you could say arguably that some of this is by design. I think a lot of times that I think there's an organic sort of cycle kind of happening as well. But people are given so much freedom that they end up kind of in a way kind of like hanging themselves with that freedom. You could say the expression I was thinking of is giving someone enough rope to hang themselves, right? It's almost like people have so many options with everything. What lifestyle do you want to live? What kind of person do you want to be? All of these different, what gender do you want to be? All of these different types of things. And people are going to take these opportunities, right? They don't know that they're not supposed to take these opportunities. And so, yeah, of course, the older I get, the more I realize that I have a appreciation for boundaries and limitations and restrictions, which is really interesting because, as I said, Saturn relates to this as well. And Saturn is an old guy. Generally in today's world, he's an old man with a beard and he has the hourglass and the scythe and everything else. And so boundaries and limitations and restrictions would be more of his game than a younger person's game, symbolically, right? Versus even the Mercurial figure. The Mercurial figure wants to travel and be free and go to and fro and whatever. And so yeah, no, I see exactly what you're saying. Related to just this thought that I had regarding Cain building the first town or being the founder of the first town, maybe having this symbolic overlap with Romulus building that first wall. Systems are actually defined by their limitation. So that is what makes a system. A system is actually more so defined by what you're not able to do, what you can't do. And so the beast system, as an example, there's that. There is like what aren't you able to do? So computer system, if you're writing code or something, it doesn't just do anything and everything. It has to fit within these certain parameters. So the idea of these walls and sort of containment and things like that, there is like a beautiful positive way of looking at that. Bestowing wisdom, passing down wisdom. Hey, you don't do this or else you're going to get hurt. And there's the other side. So restriction on one hand, there's a positive and a negative to it, potentially. It depends on what situation you're in and sort of what we're talking about. And so just like with anything else, there's like a neutral sort of quality to that. But a lot of people in today's world, they don't know when to put up these boundaries. They don't know when to put up these restrictions. They don't know when to say no. And they don't know when there's a good thing right in front of them that they should probably accept or spend more time with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so you brought up a interesting term, and it's something that is talked about in the eschatological realm, right? And you talked about the beast system, and the
Mhm.
Bible talks about this beast and what it looks like, and it comes up out of the sea. And there's two beasts, right? There's one that comes out of the land, and one comes out of the sea. But specifically, the one that comes out of the sea has 7 heads and 10 horns, and these horns
Mhm.
biblically are broken down to be kings of the earth, and then the heads are to be in a way hills or mountains, and
Mhm.
you could see the correlation with the mountains and the hills with the capital of our country, right? We're at Washington DC, even the other city state, the Vatican, right? It's got 7 hills. Have you put any thought into what a deeper meaning this may hold?
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
All right, blow
Definitely.
my brains with this.
I'll see what I can do here.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, it's so interesting to me that there are, at least from my perspective, it seems as though all of these traditions, I'm seeing more similarities than not between a lot of the things that I've been researching over the years. And I think as a symbologist too, that is one thing that I would recommend to people is to see the similarities and overlap versus seeing the differences actually between everything. We're already conditioned to think about the differences between everything. I think modern people over intellectualize everything, and the mind more so corresponds with air symbolism, which is the sword. What does the sword do? The sword severs, it cuts, it will remove a thing away from you. And so it cuts ties. And so our minds kind of more so operate in a very analytical way. It's more of like the left brain sort of side of things. You like to pick up patterns, so you're putting things in little compartments. You like to see how things are sort of separate from each other. Symbology is kind of an opposite sort of study in that you're seeing how things overlap and how they correspond and how many things actually like are completely related to each other. And so when I think of the seven heads of this beast, I can't not think of other versions of seven-headed serpents as an example. Like in the Vedic world, it's not uncommon to see a deity with a serpent that has seven heads above them. It's not uncommon to see seven-headed serpents too further east as well. And there's even a very specific deity that I'm thinking of. His name is Myokin. There's a deity named Myokin in China, and he's a North Star god. And so this is one of the things that really blew my mind a long time ago, is that there's a whole classification of deity that got lost over the centuries, and they're known as polar deities. And Myokin is a polar deity. And so he has a disc around him. If you didn't know any better, you would probably think the disc is either a standard halo, like maybe it could be the sun, or you would think that maybe it's the moon, because it is kind of lighter in color.
Well, I will say too, since you mentioned the moon, that a lot of the divine feminine, the divine goddesses, have this as well behind their head.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, exactly. So if you didn't know any better, you would think that it's either the sun or the moon, but in actuality, it's the North Star. It's a pole star. And so a lot of gods, a lot of kings and a lot of lords and emperors identified with the pole star, and they wanted to be that central point in the spinning heavens, and they wanted to rule from their center. And so they considered that star to be like an imperishable star, that it's there night after night after night, in the same position. All of the other stars go around it. So all the other stars are going to cycle through this motion night after night and then throughout the year. And so he also has 7 serpents right above his head as well. And so the number 7 really, again, has this northern correspondence. And there's really nothing you can do to kind of take that away. And so whenever anyone is looking into 7 symbolism, it probably is directing you back to the North Sky. Now, in today's world, what's happened is a lot of the symbolism that was associated with Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, was actually transferred over to the Pleiades, which is in the Taurus constellation. So you maybe have heard the Pleiades being referred to as the 7 sisters. In actuality, there's only 6 main stars, and they even have a myth about the missing 7th sister. The reason why there's a missing 7th sister, and why they call it the 7 sisters anyway, is because originally the storyline for that whole asterism came from the northern sky. And so when people were more geocentric and Earth-based, Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, were these powerful 7 stars. But when man became heliocentric and solar-based, that symbolism transferred over to the Pleiades. And so a lot of what you hear about the Pleiades actually relates to the northern sky. And if people are interested in learning more about this specifically, I have a presentation called The Pleiadians, where I lay it all out there and I talk about this whole transfer. And so the 7 heads, to me, I can't not but think about the northern sky. And when you look at illustrations of the Whore of Babylon riding this beast, she oftentimes is holding a chalice. And they say that this chalice is a chalice of filth, that it's full of abominations, right? Probably my favorite all-time illustration of this, by the way, is the one that William Blake did, The Whore of Babylon by William Blake. It's pretty incredible. And he encodes a lot of really interesting symbolism there. You'll also see, by the way, that this version, the Whore of Babylon riding the 7-headed beast, that there are some tarot cards that will use this exact framework for the strength card. And in some esoteric decks, they actually refer to this card as lust. And so, as an example, Aleister Crowley, that's his version of that card. His version of that card, he puts the Whore of Babylon there. You'll even see in a Crowley acolyte that his name is Lon Milo Duquette. In his deck, he actually shows Sophia riding the Demiurge, a lion-headed serpent. So he connects the Demiurge with this seven-headed beast. And so she's associated with this chalice. When people are referring to the chalice, there's a lot of symbolism that associates it with the Holy Grail. And so the Holy Grail would be the chalice that captured the blood of Christ, right? And there's all sorts of people looking for these relics, looking for the Holy Grail, looking for the Spear of Destiny, looking for these different types of things, the Ark of the Covenant. And in my opinion, personally, as a symbologist, I don't think that the value is in looking for the Holy Grail physically. The value is looking at the Holy Grail within. How does the Holy Grail relate to you? And as I said earlier, the grail or the chalice or the vase or the bowl even, they all relate to the heart. The heart has long been associated with the chalice. And so the search for the Holy Grail, in my opinion, it's a journey to the center of self. You know, it's about opening up your heart, and it's about tuning into that space and awareness, which I think in many ways is more primary than the brain. Most people just want to live up here in their heads. They want to intellectualize things. They don't want to feel anything. A lot of men today, that's where they're at. They're living up here, but they don't want to go below their neck or their shoulders. And I think that the heart is really sort of the symbolic seat of your spiritual impulse. And that I think that really there's a lot to be said about tuning in to your feelings and emotions and being open and things like that. There's a reason why Christ, you know, in some depictions, he's pointing at his heart's on fire, you know. And so the Holy Grail that she basically is holding, I think there's a lot to be said that that's actually at the center of self. And your body has a whole correspondence with the earth, and that the earth is terrain and we are also terrain. And so the Holy Grail could also be said to exist at the center of Earth. That's the symbolism. A lot of people want to search for these mythical lands and these mythical artifacts. And I'll say that most of them relate to the center of self, and then most of them relate to the symbolic center of Earth as well. And so even there's stories about journeying to the center of Earth. That's actually just a metaphor for journeying to the center of self, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think too. I think that's what the Vril Society was trying to do. I mean, if you can see it more illustrated in the Indiana Jones movies, where the Nazis, you know, before they became the Thule Society, then the workers or the Germans Workers' Party or whatever, it was they were in search of these artifacts, and I think the point of what true alchemy was, because again, there's this idea that alchemy is turning lead into gold, but not necessarily. That's not what true alchemists back in the day, I believed in. I think they were trying to extract energy or force, you know, that each object may be able to hold in this world. They were trying to take that out and make elixirs with it, and to try and you know, achieve eternal life here in this world. I think they were trying to you know, gather that ether or that virile energy to be able to conquer death, to beat death. And I think the whole idea that's you know, wrapped up in Gnosticism and a lot of other mystery religions is the idea of cheating death and to live here forever. And I think with that concept, I just go back to the garden. I think that what took place in the garden, it's very simple, but it explains everything, right? Like the serpent said, surely you shall not die. If anything, you'd be as gods. So there's something with people and why they believe that there's this divine spark inside of us that you can exploit or you know, come to this full connection with to achieve immortality, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. What I'll say to that is what I've kind of gathered is so when people were living this qualitative existence, and this existed in the Garden of Eden during paradise times, and when people were living this way, everything was sacred. Everything had meaning. There was intention based on my understanding of things. There was an intention behind everything, and that there was value behind everything. And so there was a spiritual connection with everything. People have had this major fall from grace since then. And so people over materialize everything. I think people do that to the stars too. People just look at these planets, and what I was taught in school was the material makeup of Mars and how big it was, and the gravitational pull on Mars and things like that. But I wasn't told the symbolic value of Mars, which existed way longer, and there's way more going on there than what Mars is materially. So modern people have this way of overemphasizing the physical world. And I see it that, based on what I've looked into, is that alchemy went through multiple changes over time, but the original alchemy was non-physical. It had nothing to do with anything chemical. It had nothing to do with anything in the lab. It was internal transmutation. It was an internal sort of dynamic. And so over time, though, as people became more material, alchemy got transferred over into this alchemical lab based sort of thing. And then recently, over the last, like, I don't know, 100 years or so, people started rediscovering internal alchemy and spiritual alchemy and things like that. And so I think that that's kind of what happened, is that it started off spiritual, it became more physical, and then I think people are rediscovering the spiritual dynamic of it.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes me think of the Courtney Turner. I had her on the show. She kind of calls it the Phoenix conspiracy. It's where, it's a rebirthing process spiritually, if that makes any sense. Which I think is why artificial intelligence and the technocrats are trying to move us to a transhumanist agenda, is to somehow, when with the idea of incorporating technology with biology, you can possibly get to this point, through the physical sense, if that makes if
Oh
that's
yeah.
clear.
Oh yeah, people have an innate desire, or because everything is built on a spiritual essence, people have this innate desire to want to return to that. And unfortunately for a lot of people, they're going to buy into this sort of return physically. Just as an example, for me personally, I think everyone should be in touch with their masculine and their feminine. And we all have it. No matter who you are, it doesn't matter how masculine you are or how feminine you are, you have the opposite. And so there are times in life where you need to be masculine, you need to be projective, you need to hold your ground, you need to put yourself out there. There are times where you need to be feminine, and you should listen, and you should be more receptive, and you should be more nurturing, and things like that. Now, there's people who have this innate desire to want to balance this within themselves. And so for someone, they're going to try and achieve that through surgeries and through how they dress and like all of these different types of things. And so they're looking for something internal, but the only thing they know how to do is to express it externally, but you're only going to get so far with that. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of things that people are going to get plugged into and hooked up with that are going to do them no favors in actuality, because what they're looking for is way more subtle than that. And it's more of an internal sort of thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, man. Well, hey, man, listen, I think we put in some work here this episode, man, and I appreciate you dearly for giving me the opportunity to have you on the show, and I'm extremely grateful, and I'm very thankful for it. I think we covered a lot of ground this episode, and it'll only just leave my community with more questions. Again, folks listening or watching, be sure to drop it in the comments if you want Mario back on the show in the future, and you want us to cover anything that we didn't get into. Just drop that in the comments and everything like that. Mario, it's time to wrap it up, man. Appreciate you dearly. For the audience that's still hanging out with us, where can they support you the most, and check out all your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So once again, symbolicstudies.com is the best place to find everything, pretty much my YouTube and Patreon and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, this was a good time. So thanks for the invite. I appreciate you, and you've given me some things to think about as well. So
Well, that's what
I'm
it's
always
all
happy
about,
that.
man.
Yeah,
That's what
definitely,
it's all
definitely.
about. And at the end of the day, too, I'm trying to kind of I don't want this to sound universal or balanced, if that makes any sense. But I'm trying to, at least from my Christian values and morals, and I wasn't raised this way. I came to Christ 16 years ago, which is crazy. 16 years, my goodness. But I'm just in the point in my life where I think people don't need to be so compartmentalized or echo chambered with certain topics, even if maybe some people may have a different view or perspective of reality. I think it's important that we can all sit down and have conversations. And I think that that's where we can get down to the nitty gritty. We can get down to a lot of detective or investigative work behind certain topics. And I love having that with any guest that I bring on the show, with that matter, man. And again, man, hey, I thank you so much for again coming on the show. I think you really laid it all out for us, and there's a lot of truth behind the things that you are saying. And again, I'm thankful, I'm grateful for it, and it's been a blast, man.
Likewise, dude. Right there with you, man.
Yeah, so folks, be sure to, check out his channel and what he does over there. He's working hard, and it's the best way to support the show by, hanging out with other networking channels that come through the show, and just try to see what golden nuggets we can get from anyone and everyone that's out there. But hey, God bless you, brother, and I'm going to head over right into the next segment, and I hope to work with you again in the future.
For sure, man. All right, take care. Have a good one.
All right, you too, brother. All right, Biblical Hitman debrief. Mario, brother, listen, that was a lot of fun. And symbolic studies, man, in the house, guys and ladies. What a show. Very impressive work from that gentleman. And that was a lot of fun getting into, I mean, what 0.5% of the symbolism in the entire world. But hey, we're going to have him on again in the future. I definitely enjoyed going over a lot of the things we got into. It was a lot of this was unplanned what we got into, and it was just kind of right off the rip, right off the cuff, you know what I'm saying? But I really think we covered a lot, and at least, from a perspective, a Christian perspective, there was so many things, so many conclusions that I'm able to draw and learn about when it comes to certain symbolism, maybe why mystery schools and the occult uh, looks at things the way they do and creates these symbols in the way that they do. And I think at the end of the day, it goes back to serpent worship, serpent cults, and the idea that there was this divine being in the garden, not only contributing to a different idea of religion, which to me is a false religion, it's error, it's not truth, but here's the thing, it's very seducing. It's agreeable, it's sensual, it's positive, right? Like there's this thing about error that is very seductive to our human nature, into why we may give it credit, or why we may go, yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. But if you're not grounded with biblical doctrine, scripture, and truth, and allow God to show you that there is a cosmic chess game, there is a cosmic battle, and I believe it's just generally uh, between truth and error, or Christianity and Gnosticism. Now, Gnosticism is just one of the many mystery religions that are out there, but I think that the theosophical view of it, and Blavatsky gets into it, they all do have a different label on them, but they are all the same. And when you really trace back a lot of these religions into the roots of what they worship, it goes back to my consensus of a false trinity, a false idea that was fed to Cain. Cain then passed it down through his bloodline, and it does wrap itself around the same idea of fallen angel worship and fallen angel divinity, and a lot of the things that we did kind of cover, right, as far as the heavens above, and why cultures and civilizations are so wrapped up in worshiping what is above us and worshiping what's inside of us, without even giving any credit to a creator, or going, you know what, I'm going to worship the creator and not the creation. There's so much with each and every one of these things that is foundation of what it is that they are deciding to worship. It's the creation, not the creator. I think that's the one of the main elements as well with the religion of error, right? And I do think that in time, I think the world's being prepared for it. I think that the world's being grounded for this idea that a one world ruler is coming and he's going to unite everything. He's going to unite even, for example, the Judaic and Islam and Christianity. We got into that those three there. Um, have some sort of cube worship to it, which is crazy because I think Christianity has been separate from all of the religions around the world purposely until now, which I think mystery religion has gotten into the church and now it's pushing Christianity up on the same threshold as all of the other religions in the world. And when this Antichrist does come, which he's going to come in a Messiah form, he's going to come as God. Okay, that's what we have to understand here. And that the abomination of desolation is a very mind blowing concept that this being is going to go into the temple of God, showing himself that he is God and proclaiming that he is God. And I think all of the religions are going to submit to this because they each have one piece of the puzzle, and that's why the world, when it comes to a uniting when the world comes to unite, each puzzle piece has to come fit together and it'll draw out this big image. We cover too another aspect or just another addition to unification is balance. And you have to understand too that I think it's dangerous waters to fully dive into the idea of balance. And balance really it goes as far as Eastern religion, Eastern mysticism, but it goes all the way back to the garden, right? Like the tree of knowledge of good and evil is a balance between both realms. We know that God is order. God does not believe or create. He didn't create things to be balanced. He created things to be in order. If, for example, we have uh with the idea, I forget the exact word for it, but order is so important. It's because each item or each objective has its purpose. And for example, let's just take the aspect of creation because it was created in an order, right? So you have God, you have Christ, you have man, you have woman, you have children, and there's a flux of serving each other, right? But each part is divided. God comes to divide things because that brings order to things. And if you don't have the division between man and woman, then you have no need for Christ or children. And I think why we see a lot of the things in the political spectrum, why the people who advocate for a balanced society, which we can see that with the androgynous aspect of politics, where people are switching and changing roles, genders, and all this kind of stuff, not only in the physical idea, but I think it all starts spiritually. I think that why they dislike children so much is because the balanced realm doesn't leave any room for children, and why they also dislike Christ at such a high level. There also is no room for Christ in this infinity sign with men and women inside of it. And there's a lot of occult symbolism that also gets into the infinity sign, which is it resembles balance, right? Above, so below. You have androgynous symbols where male and female. There is no room for the beautiful things, the things that give ultimate purpose to our lives, which is Christ and children, in my opinion. And you need a really well fundamentally structured family to be able to thrive. with those things. And this isn't me in any way saying women aren't as good as men aren't, are as good as women. What I'm saying is we that we're individuals, and we're all created for a specific purpose and a reason. It's just, that's the truth, right? People want to push truth away, and they want to go to error because it makes them feel good, it's sensual, it's agreeable, it satisfies the craving of their lusts and their flesh, when truth actually has true purpose to it. It's almost like if we have a military, why we have divisions in our military. There's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and special operators. We have it that way because it's what makes the whole body of our military work and function properly. It's what helps it move like a full oiled machine, right? Um, and there's great success with the outcome, that pertains to that. I like kind of too how I like Mario. I like how he got into the Freemason stuff, right? The Freemason stuff brought a few different aspects to the table for me, as far as the two pillars, but the one pillar in the middle. Also, the idea with the square and the compass, right? I kind of threw in the idea that the circle, which is the compass, that goes back to serpent worship, in my opinion. And I also think that the square goes back to the four corners of the earth, the four winds, goes back to Marduk, and it kind of just stems back from Marduk to Nimrod to Semiramis to Tammuz. And it's very interesting, with the heavenly worship that comes with that false trinity as well, because that's where we do get a lot of the trinities from. um each culture, religion, and all this kind of stuff. I think it goes all the way back to Babylon. I think that the languages were confused, and the people dispersed after God, spread people around the world after that. And I think that that's why each religion is in the label it has. And I think too, what just to bring it full circle back with that, that's why each culture in these different, geolocations of the world, we're building pyramids, because I think at the end of the day, maybe the Tower of Babel had some sort of pyramid architecture or construction behind it, with all that. But hey, I'm not feeling too good. If y'all could just show some support and prayer from me. I've been under the weather a little bit, but I'm able to knock out a 2 hour and 15-minute podcast. Let's go. And I'm doing it for y'all, folks. I love y'all very much, and I appreciate each and every one of you for giving this show a chance and supporting it in the ways that the show needs it the most, with the ad space, with everything, because ads are being ran through the platform in order to help support the overhead of the show and to keep it going. And I really do appreciate each and every one of you for getting through that. I know it sucks, but I'm in the works of trying to come up with an ad-free space. I'm in the works of creating a Patreon, something very cheap. Maybe the amount of a hamburger. The cost of a hamburger at McDonald's. Um, so the next time you're eating a hamburger at McDonald's, just know that you can subscribe to the Patreon. But it's still a working model. I think what I'm gonna have to do, and it's a lot of work, everybody, is I gotta move over 117 episodes onto Patreon, because I don't want to start where I'm at now, with ad-free content. I want to be able to give all of the content that I've been able to put out there for everyone, new or returning supporter. So that's in the works. Much love to you guys. I know I harp on the support thing, but I really do appreciate it. And listen, hey, if you're still hanging out with us, you're still listening to the podcast, you want to support the video side of where I'm at, head on over to YouTube. Listen, everyone's on YouTube. If you haven't done so and you want to support the show, hit that subscribe button, the Biblical Hitmen. And while you're there, drop a like, drop a follow, drop a comment, share with your friends, all this stuff. Like I said earlier in the show, please comment any symbols maybe you want me to get into with Mario down the road that we didn't cover. Also, we're not just on the video side of things, y'all. we're on the audio. And if you're a video supporter, head on over to the audio. All you got to do is fast forward through the episode a little bit, and you'll be able to leave a 5-star review. I'm trying to get those 5 stars up there. And of course, do it out of your own um, well-being. If you like the show, it's something that really helps support the show. So yeah, audio side, make sure you drop 5 stars, hit that follow on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Spreaker, wherever you consume your podcast content. And while you're there, please as well drop comments, galore with all of that. And hit the notification bells on both platforms because I'm posting every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. I want to get y'all's thoughts, and the only way I can do that is drop it in the comments. But should I post Friday morning instead of Saturday morning for the audio? Kind of debating. I know everyone kind of likes to tune into the show more during the week. I do see that with the analytics and stuff. So I just want to be able to support y'all, just like you're supporting me, and be able to give y'all some awesome content. But with all of that said, everyone, got nothing but love for you. Praise the Lord Jesus Christ for allowing me to do this show each and every time I get the opportunity to do it. And, we're all sinners at the end of the day. We need a savior. So the decision is yours, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you all. I love you very much. I'm going to see you next time.